Testing, testing, testing. Testing, testing.
through the office lately, and it's kind of get confusing to me. Okay, and I've got some feedback.
No, it's me. It's because I'm close to you.
Okay. Can you hear me okay if it's down here? Okay. You ready? Okay. Huh?
Is unmuted.
Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Lobbyist training here in October of 2022. This will be our last training for the year, which is kind of hard to believe. I'm Tom Albritton. I'm the director of the State Ethics Commission. I expect that this will probably take a little less than an hour. And the point of this is to give you the basics about what the Ethics Act covers and specifically how it relates to what you do as lobbyists when you are lobbying on behalf of your clients. I don't expect you to remember everything that we talk about today, but what I do hope that you will remember is that we are a resource for when you have questions about activities that you may want to engage in or other questions about whether activity is covered or prohibited by the ethics law. Okay. Now, as I said, I'm the director. My chief assistant is Cynthia Ralston. And
Hi.
On our slideshow, we have on the PowerPoint, we have slideshow. I'm dating myself like I'm in elementary school. But anyway, on the PowerPoint, there's a number that for those of you who are attending my webinar that you can text questions to. That number is inaccurate, and Cynthia is going to give you the number to text questions to. What we ask is that if you have questions, please go ahead and send them when you have them, and we will address those at the end of the presentation in case some of the information that we go over answers in between the beginning and the end. And also, we would like to address them all at the same time. So, Cynthia?
Okay. Yeah, and the number is 334-303-1726. And again, that's 334-303-1726. And please text us with any questions, and I'll be fielding those while Tom's up here. So.
Right. And she and I do this in tandem together. Cynthia also presently is the one that you will deal with if you have questions about lobbying. Our lobbyist liaison unfortunately left us close now to about a month ago. And so Cynthia, who has served in that capacity before, is presently who your contact will be. So I would tell you that if you have any questions about anything involving your job as a lobbyist, call her, email her, and ask her about it. And if it's a question that is outside of our jurisdiction, we will direct you to the right people who can answer your question. But we really want you to use us as a clearinghouse for information to help you do your job better. Now, everything that I say here today is the minimum ethical requirements that you have to abide by. You are certainly more than welcome to go above and beyond what these basic requirements are. And nothing we say in here today is legal advice. Nothing we say in here today gives you legal protection from prosecution. All we are doing is giving you a general overview of the Ethics Act. Okay, now that I've given out that disclaimer, that's probably the last time that you will hear that from me today. Now, our commission is made up of 5 individuals who are appointed by the governor, lieutenant governor, and speaker of the House. They serve staggered 5-year terms. I am not the commission. I work for the commission. I'm an employee of the commission, as is the staff. But our commissioners make all of the official decisions. Okay. Does anybody here who was here in person lobby in any other states, any other jurisdictions? Okay. If you did, what I was going to tell you is that the way we were set up is remarkably similar to the way it is set up in every other jurisdiction that has an ethics commission. These individuals serve for the rate of $50 a meeting. We buy them lunch, and that is the only compensation they get. So they are essentially all volunteer positions. Our chairman of the commission is John Plunk. He's on the screen behind me. He is a lawyer from Athens, Alabama. Lynn Stewart is former Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court. She is our co-chair, and she lives down in Baldwin County. Is anybody here from out of state? Everybody here Alabama folks?
From Louisiana.
You're from Louisiana? Okay. Well, then you may not know who this is, but she is a former Chief Justice of Alabama Supreme Court. Louisiana has an ethics commission too, don't they? Okay, you don't do any lobbying in Baton Rouge? Okay. I was just gonna pick your brain about how they do stuff. Some jurisdictions I do have contact with. Louisiana's just not one of them. So one of the most helpful people there. But anyway, her husband is on our commission too, so that's her connection with us. Thank you, Brian. Her connection with us. We are by statute allowed to have 5 commissioners. We had one who resigned last year, so currently we have 4. But however, this next session, we expect that the Senate will confirm a 5th appointee to the commission.
I'm getting, Tom is muted now.
Right, but I'm not anymore.
Okay, well,
So-
hopefully that's the way.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Okay. One of our main functions, huh?
It's fixed.
Okay.
Now I'm getting all the responses that, oh, he's back.
Right. Yeah, thanks for letting me know, because I don't know. I just kind of talk. I must have just kind of hit it. Is it supposed to be flashing?
Is it flashing green?
Yeah? We're going to say that's a good thing. They'll let us know if it's not. So anyway, one of the chief functions of the commission is to answer questions for you or for anybody else who is affected by the decisions of the Ethics Commission. We can do that through one of 2 processes. Far and away, our largest process for giving information is through our informal opinions. Informal opinions, some of you have requested informal opinions from us before. What that involves, he and I know each other. I actually used to be their lawyer when I was back in my other life, so it's always nice to see a friendly face here from Opp, Alabama. But anyway, I digress. Huh?
I'm from Enterprise.
Oh, are you? Okay, well, we got hometown people here.
You can look over here too.
Okay, I did some stuff for Enterprise when I was in private practice. How's everything in Enterprise?
What?
How's everything in Enterprise?
Great. I'm just not there now in Mobile.
Okay, you're from Enterprise though. Ooh, I want to hear that long story. Okay, well maybe after. So anyway, we answer questions for you or for anybody who is affected by the act, and the process is this. You can call us on the phone or you can email us, but eventually you're going to have to email your question to us. And you can ask a question as simple as, I have taken on a new client. What obligation do I have to update my registration with the Ethics Commission? And we will respond to that question by saying you've got to update your registration with us within 10 days. And I will copy Cynthia on that, and we will handle it that way. Or you may say, I've got this event that's coming up, and I want to know what the limit is on the amount of money I can spend under the Ethics Act. No, no, it's back on. Thank you. I can now hear it when it goes out, and I'm not sure why it's doing that.
Maybe the battery's dying, I don't know. If you want my mic, you just have it.
Yeah, that may be why it's flashing. So anyway, I'll monitor it as long as I can. I'm going to hold this thing because it's entirely possible that some fat here keeps on cutting it off. So I'm going to hold this. But anyway, you may have a question about what the limits are on how much you can spend. And so we will answer that question for you too. Now, what you need to understand is that informal opinions do not give you the same legal protection from prosecution that a formal advisory opinion gives you. An informal opinion simply is the staff's best answer that we can give based on the facts that you give us, but you may need a quick turnaround on that answer, so that's why we recommend that you first ask us for an informal opinion. Also, most of the questions that we get asked are questions that are easily answerable by the clear language of the code itself or through previous advisory opinions we've given. And so in those instances, it's very easy for us to tell you what the answer is. And I will also tell you that in my experience, generally lobbyists don't ask questions that are particularly difficult, because usually what you're asking is, this is what I want to do, can I do it? And that's something that is generally very easy for us to answer just from a straight reading of the Code of Alabama. We have had questions asked both by lobbyists and the companies that employ them or otherwise direct their activities. And the best example I can give you of that was a few years ago now. We had, and Cynthia will talk about it in a few minutes, we had a question asked about whether at an event where you have multiple sponsors, whether the expenses for that can be aggregated among all the participants. That is relevant because as a lobbyist, you have a requirement to disclose to the commission any expenditures in excess of $250 made within a 24-hour period. And so for lobbyists and for the principals, it was important to know whether they had met that cutoff and exactly how to figure that. So we answered that question in a formal advisory opinion for the Business Council of Alabama, and that's available on our website. The short answer is in many instances, you can aggregate those expenses among the participants. It really depends on what you're spending the money on, but I think the opinion does a pretty good job of delineating what those requirements are and where the limits are for that. A formal advisory opinion, however, is voted on by our commission in a public meeting, and so it is a public hearing. We have those every 60 days, and once the commission approves it, it does give you protection from prosecution. If you have requested the advisory opinion, gave us all the right facts, and you rely on that opinion. Also, anyone who is similarly situated and materially similar to the question that was asked in the formal advisory opinion can also rely on those. Okay, so do you have any questions about the informal opinion process or the formal opinion process? The other thing that we can do and generally do for lobbyists is pre-certify events that you want to engage in. So let's say that you are with a group and you want to have a legislative reception during the general session of the legislature. You can ask us to approve that event ahead of time, and we can approve it, and you can feel comfortable hosting the reception, inviting the public officials, and providing to them the things that you would normally provide during a reception. Okay, so what that usually looks like is an association here in town will invite all members of the legislature and all the constitutional officers to the archives building for a reception on a Thursday night or Wednesday night during the session, and it looks like what you would expect. There's generally food and other beverages that are served there, and it's a come and go kind of thing. Sometimes there'll be a program, sometimes there won't be. But when we pre-certify those events, we put them on our calendar that's accessible on the commission's website. We will have your request, we will have our approval. And the reason that I pass that on to you is, one, the public will, if we pre-certify it, will have access to what your event is and also who's being invited to it, where it's going to be, what's going to be offered to them, all that. But also, if you are new to this and you would like to see what other people have done and what we have approved, you can use that as a tool to structure your own event. So you can go back and you can see what we have pre-certified for these people going back a number of years. And so I recommend that you use that as a guide. I would think if I were starting out, that would be incredibly helpful. And then, of course, if you have any other questions about your event, you can follow up with us through the informal opinion process. Okay? Any questions about pre-certification?
Do the names have to be listed individually or as a group?
You mean the list of invitees? The question was whether the individuals who are invited have to be listed individually or in a group. We prefer that you give us the names individually unless your group is the entire legislature. When you say we're inviting every single member of the legislature, then we know who that is. If you send a request and you say we're going to invite several public officials and several public employees, I'm going to follow up and say, would you please give us a list of invitees to that? And there are a couple of reasons for that. The reasons why you can have these events are provided for within the code. All right, there's certain events that the Code of Alabama says you can sponsor and offer things to public officials in the course of, but there are certain requirements that have to be met. The main exception that y'all are going to travel under is called the widely attended event exception. And the reason I always ask if you do any lobbying in any other states is, or if you do it on the federal level, is that concept of a widely attended event is recognized all throughout the country and also at the federal level as an acceptable interaction between lobbyists and those they lobby. However, in Alabama, the requirements are that there must be a diversity of views and opinions expressed within the group invited, and you have to reasonably expect that at least 12 people are going to attend. So I like to get the list because that's verification that you have invited at least 12 people. to it. And also, I do think that the public has a right to know who you are, who you're influencing. So that's another reason why we have requested that as part of our pre-certification process. Did that sufficiently answer your question? Okay. The one thing I'll tell you about pre-certification is that you have to make the request for pre-certification at least 10 days ahead of the event. We have an administrative rule that prohibits my pre-certification of an event if you request on less than 10 days' notice. And that's a hard and fast rule, so make sure you remember that 10-day rule. Okay. Any questions about pre-certification? Okay, I want to talk to you a little bit about enforcement, because one of our functions is enforcement of the Ethics Act. Some states don't have not given their Ethics Commission that kind of authority. Ours has given us limited authority in that regard, and so I want to talk about that just briefly. Any violation of the Ethics Act can be considered by us and investigated by us as long as it is initiated through the filing of a formal written complaint. We can't take oral complaints filed with us. We can't take anonymous complaints. We actually have a complaint form that you have to fill out, and you have to sign it. It's got to be notarized, and it's got to be supported. Information. This one's going out too. Okay, but I think it's okay, but it's not blinking just yet. So anyway, once we receive that, and if the complaint states a violation of our act, in other words, it states a use of office or personal gain, or it states that some public official was corruptly influenced, take the form of actually paying somebody money to achieve a certain result for you legislatively. In other words, giving them something that would not otherwise be entitled to in order to achieve a certain legislative result. You might want to think of it in terms of bribery. That's certainly that is certainly something that is outside of our code, but that same conduct finds expression within our code. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Our commission has to resolve these complaints within 180 days or we lose jurisdiction over them. We can get a one-time extension of up to 360 days, but after that we lose jurisdiction over it. Our commission sits as a probable cause board. They receive the evidence, they review the evidence, and if they believe it is more likely than not that there's been a violation, then we can refer it to the Attorney General's office for further investigation or prosecution, or to your local DA. Okay, so the kind of complaints that would involve y'all, if one were to be filed against you, would likely be that you had given something to corruptly influence somebody's official action. Okay, so understanding that complaints can come from wherever. I think that's one value of the pre-certification process, is that if you have the event pre-certified by us ahead of time, then that's a pretty good piece of paper to have in your pocket in case somebody wanted to claim that you had somehow done something that you should not have done. The other thing that you need to be aware of is that as a lobbyist, you cannot offer what is called a thing of value to any public official or public employee. And so again, the allowances for things like widely attended events are an exception to that general prohibition. And that's again why the pre-certification process is helpful to you. Tell you that the thing of value is defined as any gift, benefit, favor, service, gratuity. Tickets to ball games are considered that. So anything that's got a dollar amount that you can attach to it and that you give to a public official or public employee could fall within that general prohibition. So you want to make sure that if you are doing it, that it clearly falls within one of the exceptions. And there are currently 18 exceptions to that general prohibition. Okay. So again, the informal opinion process, the pre-certification process can really be your friend if there are things you want to give public officials. And let's be honest, when you're doing your job, you're going to want to give things to them. Okay, that's what y'all do. I mean, we get that. And that's why the code also allows you to do that within certain restrictions. So we are more than happy to help you maneuver through those. But if a complaint were filed, we would have to investigate it within this period of time. Intentional violations of the Ethics Act are Class B felonies, punishable by between 2 and 20 years in prison. Other violations are misdemeanors, punishable up to a year, with heavy fines involved. And the statute of limitations for intentional violations is 4 years. For every other violation, it's 2 years. Okay, so that's a pretty long period of time to have to, worry about that. So my recommendation to you is clearly don't do things that you are consciously aware of that are seeking to corruptly influence anybody. Don't corruptly influence people. But second of all, because I know that that y'all want to do it the right way, be sure to ask questions ahead of time so that you're not accused of trying to corruptly influence folks. Okay. Any questions about any of that I've gone over so far? Okay, it's not advancing. Yes, please.
There you go.
Okay. The overall theme of the Ethics Act is this that I've gone over before, is that no public official can use his or her position to benefit himself, herself, or a member of their family or any business they're associated with. As I have just told you, you can't offer a thing of value to a public official or a public employee. But I've gone over that. The other thing I want you to be aware of is that as a lobbyist, there is one provision of our code that actually is, I'm not going to say protective of you, but it certainly puts up a barrier for you there, and that is this provision that's in front of you now, that no lobbyist can be solicited for anything, whether it is a thing of value or not, except for a campaign contribution. They can hit you up for campaign contributions within the restrictions of the Fair Campaign Practices Act. But beyond that, the code is very clear that you cannot be solicited for anything other than a campaign contribution. There's no limit on what you can contribute. Not in Alabama, there's not. There are timing restrictions, though, on when they can request it. Okay, so the timing of campaign financing is provided for separately in the Fair Campaign Practices Act. We have jurisdiction over that act too, in defining that act. So right now during campaign season, it's okay to contribute, but for 120 days after the election to offset debt that they've incurred, they can do that. But that's again controlled by the Fair Campaign Practices Act. So just remember that if you are lobbying and they come and somebody comes up to you and says, hey, can you contribute to this, that, or the other pet project of mine? That is something that is really prohibited by the Ethics Act, which is why when you are offering these things, it's important for you to know within which restrictions you can operate. And I'll tell you that pretty much anything you're going to want to do is allowed. Anything that you're going to want to do within reason is allowed. You can wine them, you can dine them, you can invite them to functions that you've got. You can pay for reasonable transportation, reasonable and necessary transportation. There are food costs that you can assume on their behalf that are outside of the food restrictions that you've got. As a lobbyist, you can spend $25 per meal with an annual cap of $150, and your principal, which is the business that has retained you and otherwise controls your actions, can spend $50 with an annual cap of $250. That's a separate standalone exception. So again, the point that I want you to remember is that you can buy food for them, you can buy drinks for them, you can invite them to these receptions, you can cover hotel rooms. All of that is covered under exceptions found within the Ethics Act. Okay, but you also need to remember that general prohibition. So if you're wanting to do things for them, again, my recommendation is that you just ask us whether it is something that is allowed or whether it's something that's prohibited. Anything less than $25 is defined in the code as de minimis. And as a general rule, you can freely give things of de minimis value without running afoul of the Ethics Act. Okay, the only exception to that is that if you were offering something of de minimis value for the purpose of corruptly influencing somebody's official action, then that's still prohibited. Okay, so if you think about it, that the overarching principle that trumps everything else is if you're offering something to corruptly influence somebody's official action. Does that make any kind of sense to you, or am I being confusing? I need some feedback. Y'all getting it?
We get it.
Okay. Yes, sir.
You can give them something, but it can't be given for influence, is that what you're saying?
That it cannot be given to corruptly influence them. All right, look, I mean, you're not inviting them to these legislative receptions because you don't want to influence them. I mean, the whole point of those is to influence them, okay? I mean, that's what lobbyists do, is influence on behalf of your principal, okay? We get that. So the point is you cannot corruptly influence them. It's, again, it's to level the playing field, and it's to prohibit them from acting outside of the general restrictions, you know, that give everybody equal access to these public officials. So, I mean, if you were a well-heeled principal and you just simply gave somebody outside of a campaign contribution just a chunk of money to achieve a certain result, and it was specifically given for that purpose, then that would be, I think, in my mind, considered to be attempting to corruptly influence their official actions. Okay? Or let's say that you promised a job to one of their children if they would vote a certain way. All right? That's, again, something that I personally would consider to be attempting to corruptly influence their official action. Okay? If you were inviting them to a dinner at Central here in Montgomery, and there are two committees from the legislature invited, one from the House and one from the Senate, and you're buying their dinner and you're talking about legislation that's important to your client, that's fair game. Okay? You seem unconvinced.
No, I'm just trying to think, I'm just thinking to myself, the line that's being drawn.
Well, the line comes down to intent,
Right.
okay? Intent and motive, which is, again, why I recommend, if you've got any questions about that, that you ask us ahead of time or that you pre-certify your event. Because our pre-certification, let's just be honest about it, our pre-certification is evidence that we have determined that your event does not violate the Ethics Act. So as long as you act consistently with what you put in your letter to us that we pre-certified, then, you know, you've got that cover. But I would ask for it. And if you don't ask for pre-certification, which you don't have to do, you don't have to ask for it, then if you've got any questions at all about whether it's an allowable expense, then I would ask us that question. I think a good example for you is this. Let's say that you have an event that's out of state that you want to take some public officials to, all right? It may be that there may be an industry that is locating in Alabama or legislation that's going to allow a certain type of economic activity within the state, and there is a facility, let's say in Georgia, and your principal wants to show these legislators what it looks like in Georgia, because that's what it's going to look like in Alabama. And so there are travel expenses that would be involved in that, and it might be air travel, or it might be overnight stays out of state. Those kind of things I would recommend that you ask us about ahead of time. We routinely okay those kind of expenditures, but we need to get facts from you showing why you're going, what the purpose of it is, where they're going to be staying, what you're going to be covering, all of that before we can approve it. So it really is kind of outside of the obvious things like a legislative reception. Sometimes it can be a little less clear, and for that reason, I would recommend that you ask us about it.
So Birmingham is in the midst of building a new amphitheater.
I saw that.
Yeah, so we know it's gonna compete with the amphitheater in Shelby County. I think they're gonna close that one up. So,
You're talking about it's going to compete with Oak Mountain?
I think they're gonna close that one. I'm not sure, I heard, but, so if you want to take, somebody from Birmingham, commissioner, whatever, over to Atlanta to see that amphitheater, let's see what it looks like, so that you would get an idea of capacity, how it's
Right.
structured, going to be built. You would have to, could you pre-certify that before you go? Or would that be a good thing to pre-certify that before you go?
Yeah, the question was, if Birmingham built a amphitheater that would compete, let's say, with Oak Mountain or something else in the region, but there is a facility in Atlanta that is similar to what they want to build in Birmingham, can you take public officials over there to view that, offset the expenses, and furthermore, is that something that should be pre-certified? My short answer is this: we have pre-certified events like that numerous times. What we would want from you is an outline of who you're taking, why you're taking, what you're going to be offering when you're over there. And you can do that either through an informal opinion or pre-certification. So my recommendation would be is that you either ask for an informal opinion about that or get it pre-certified, one of the two. You don't have to do either. But I'm just saying that if it were me, I would want to know that I had at least checked that off my box. I mean, because you know how people can second guess these things, and there are often competing interests in any project like that. So my advice would be just to eliminate one area of concern and ask about it. But now again, there's nothing wrong if you don't ask about it. You're just kind of going on your own judgment about these things, which you're all perfectly capable of analyzing it the same way that we are. I'm just saying that the code allows us to do these things for you, and so I would take advantage of it.
But if you're new into the business and you're trying not to cross the line, it would be a good idea for knowledge and experience to pre-certify or get an informed opinion. Would that be correct?
If you're new to the business and you're trying to learn things, yes, my advice would be is to get it pre-certified or get an informal opinion about these things that you've never done before. I would advise that to everybody. And then for those of you who have done it before, I would say just to make sure that everything's covered, I would still do it. But certainly if you're just starting out, I would ask for an informal opinion or a pre-certification. Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to Cynthia. Do you need my?
Okay, hello. So Tom has covered a lot of what I was going to cover, but I'm going to,
I do that.
Concierge is directing me. Can you see me up there? Okay. Okay, so he covered a bunch of what I have to cover, but I'm going to give you the advisory opinions that help define and give some context to the rules that he was talking about pre-certifications. So generally speaking, when I came here almost 6 years ago, understanding the Ethics Act and sort of putting it all together, pre-certification is really just another exception to the definition of a thing of value. And that's what you're trying to do, is get away from giving a public official or an employee a thing of value. So the definition of thing of value is really found in those 18 exceptions. What can I do? You can have a widely attended event. You can have an educational function or an economic development function. You can pay for actual and necessary travel and lodging expenses. You can give some hospitality that's a part of the event, okay? Those are sort of the general parameters. The specifics of that are going to be contained, the definitions of widely attended event, educational function, and economic development function are in our Act, so I'm not going to go through those, but just know that those are contained in the Ethics Act in the definition sections, which is Section 1. So that's 3625(1). This thing is a little finicky today, isn't it?
You need to advance.
I would love for you to advance, Vanna. Also dating myself. Okay, as I said, you can pay for transportation and lodging. We're going to want to know some details about that. What lodging are you paying for? What transportation are you paying for? Are you flying them on a private jet when the conference is 4 hours away. All of that might matter when the determination about pre-certification, when Tom makes that determination. You can advance. Sorry, I'm going to disrupt you the whole time. Okay, same thing with economic development function. The difference with a widely attended event and an educational function, you can actually pay for the spouse as well as the public employee or the public official. That is not so for an economic development function. All right, go ahead. The hospitality exception, as I said, I'm actually just going to go ahead and advance several slides. I'm going to get to the advisory opinions. Go ahead. This is all contained in our act. It's really sort of superfluous. Sorry about that.
And I've gone over a lot of it.
Right, we've covered a good bit of it. So we're going to get to the nuts and bolts of lobbying when we're done with this.
I'm going as fast as I can, boss.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so integral part, this is something that comes up all the time. You can't have a deep sea fishing trip that has nothing to do with your conference and take a bunch of public officials on it, okay? That's called a standalone event. But hospitality that's an integral part is the opening reception. The night before the conference, you have a reception where you have drink and food, and everybody gets together. It's not an educational function, but it is, everybody's doing it, okay? That is what hospitality is really an integral part. So maybe don't try to get fancy with what integral part means, okay? But if you have that, just ask us and we can tell you whether or not it qualifies. Go ahead. So as Tom talked about, you have 10 days. You have to do it more than 10 days ahead or it won't be pre-certified. As he said, it doesn't mean it's illegal. It just means that it's not pre-certified. And the comfort for the pre-certification is really for the employees and the officials, right? So they want to go and see on the website, it's pre-certified. I do not have to worry about whatever they give me at this conference when I'm at the hotel. And that just makes them feel better. Okay. Keep going. All right, this is an opinion that's got a lot of information in it. These advisory opinions that were given regarding lobbyists and principals and that interaction and that relationship are dense. So there's lots of case notes. We have head notes in all of our opinions that give you sort of a summary of what the opinion says. But I recommend reading the ones that you see up here. Advisory opinion 2011-9. This is talks about the expenditures for food. Okay, this is, you can't stack expenditures. So regardless of whether or not you have a widely attended event, economic function, or educational function, you can buy employees and officials food. As a lobbyist, you can spend up to $25 per official 6 times a year. As a principal, you can spend up to $50 per official or employee up to 6 times a year. You can't stack those. So if you're with your principal, y'all cannot buy the official or employee $75 worth of food. Does that make sense? Okay. So it really is dependent on the official. That's the person who's receiving it. So they can only receive either one $50 meal or one $25 meal, but everybody can't get together and take them to a $300 dinner, right? Go ahead. So there's no exclusion for, if you lobby in Alabama, if you meet the definitions of lobbying, and as lobbyists, this way? Okay. I'm going to play. I'm being directed to, but I appreciate it very much. So y'all can see. De minimis lobbying. There's no small amount of lobbying that doesn't require registration. All right? If you lobby in Alabama, you have to register as a lobbyist unless you are excluded from the definition of lobbyist. All right? If you have a question about that, please feel free to ask us. We are free. That does not reflect on our capability, but we give you free legal advice. So please ask us. There's no reason to ever hesitate in doing that. So that's Advisory Opinion 2016-5. And as I said, these, if I didn't say, I'll say it again. These are located on our website, ethics.alabama.gov, advisory opinions, and you can search for these numbers. It's not the most stellar search engine, but it'll get you there eventually. And if you still can't find it, email me and I'll send it to you. Yes, ma'am?
Is it 2016-5 or 2016-15?
2016-15.
Okay.
I just didn't read it correctly when I turned around.
Okay. I just want to make sure I wrote it down so I can.
Yes, no, absolutely, thank you. All right, go ahead. And this one has lots of information in it. It's 2011-11, and this gets the bulk of the hospitality that you can provide. This is where you get the integral part, some context around that. Participants have to be involved, the sponsors have to, the sponsors of the event need to sign on to it, whatever the hospitality is. Go ahead. Go ahead. Okay, this is the one that Tom was talking about, the 2018 one. It was the first one of the year. And the question was whether or not you can aggregate with multiple sponsors. You can do that, but as many of you may know already, if you don't, I'll tell you. If you spend more than $250 on a public official or candidate within a 24-hour period, you have to report that to us. Okay, those are the expenditures for principals or for public officials and candidates that you have to report. Sometimes there are multiple sponsors to an event. Somebody puts $2,500 in, somebody puts $10,000 in, and then the money is separated. I mean, is put in a pot and then it's used. But you can't just donate $10,000 and not give us some specification about how you spent that money. You're still going to have to report to us whether or not you spent $250, more than $250 a day. If you paid for somebody, if your portion of that sponsorship was, I'm going to pay for a block of 10 rooms, and that you're paying $260 a night for the rooms. So you can aggregate, but you still have to give us that specific cost. I've recognized, and I'll talk about this at the end too, but we're going to be making some updates on our website and our filing. Am I still in the way? Sorry. Okay. That in order to be able to individualize the expenditures that you make as a lobbyist, so you can say on John Doe, I paid for hotel expenses that were $275, and there's going to be right now it's just a free form text box, and it's not all that directive. So we're going to update that, so it'll be a little bit easier if that happens for you. Okay, you can go ahead. And then 2018-7, this is, so we have the definition section that I talked about, is 3625-1, and then the legislature passed an act that updated the definition of lobbying. It amended the definition of lobbying. But that amendment is actually 3625-1.1. So it's in a different code section, just the next one over. And that addresses what is colloquially called executive branch lobbying. That's what the reference is. And it's about, it talks about whether or not if you're trying to contract with state government, then you are considered a lobbyist. The reason this is a significant change is because in the exceptions to the definition of lobbyist, if you are selling goods or services, then you're not a lobbyist. But this 1.1 executive branch lobbying makes it that if you're trying to contract with the state of Alabama, you actually are a lobbyist and you have to register. And that's what this advisory opinion articulates. Okay. Go ahead. I think, are we done with, you're going to have parting thoughts. Okay, so before the parting thoughts, let me talk to you about some procedure stuff. Okay, so ignore the slide behind me. So the lobbying, I know that you all are new, some of you may need, who is newly registered in the room? Okay, so this is new. When you register, as you know, you go on our website, first time registrant, and you enter your principal information and you're registered. And I send you, hopefully all of you have gotten your credentials in order to log in if your principal is verified, and you're able to log in. Okay, so what those credentials do is they allow you to file your quarterly reports online. They allow you to sign up for training, that you can terminate your lobbyist registration there as well. If you end your relationship, and termination seems like an awfully harsh word, but largely sometimes people after the session, they just don't need a lobbyist anymore, so then you terminate your lobbying registration. Those are what you use your credentials for. Currently, you can't add a principal once you have done your initial registration. We are working to correct that in the new year. I can't make promises, but I'm hopeful that we will be able to add principals online after the new year. But right now you can't, and so you would need to fill out the paper form that is found at the Lobbyist Principal tab of our website, the downloadable forms. You would just send me the principal registration statement as well as a supplemental lobbyist registration. That's not something that everybody always sends in, but it's actually required by our act. So we're going to start, making sure that people do that certainly in the new year. So if you register for 10 principals on January 1, you add another one in June, you have to report that within 10 days of undertaking any lobbying activities. So when you register that, you just need to send us that supplemental registration for yourself and then the principal verification. Okay, we call that a principal registration, but they're really just verifying that yes, John Doe is lobbying for Acme Company. And if you do reach a point where you're not going to lobby for them anymore because the session is over or whatever, your contract ends, you can initiate that termination process online as well using those credentials. When you log in, there's just a little menu to the left. And then whoever initiates, whether it's the principal or you, then the other party will get an email to say, just follow these steps and it will be terminated. So then it's terminated in our system. And then you don't have to file a quarterly report. But if you terminate, for instance, if you roll into the third quarter and you're registered as a lobbyist, even if you meant to terminate earlier or were going to terminate and you're not really going to lobby in the third quarter, if you're registered, you have to file a quarterly report for that quarter. And then once you have terminated, you don't. All right. So some people just choose, if they're in the third quarter, they just choose to go ahead and stay registered and then just let the registration lapse at the end of the year, and they simply don't re-register for the new year. Quarterly reports, you can file those online. It's really pretty straightforward. I will be doing some modifications. Those are going to happen for the new year, and it just hopefully make it a little more straightforward in your lobbying registration. If there's anything off in your quarterly report, you don't see a principal that you're supposed to have, just email me and I can take care of it and help walk you through it. If your principal does not verify your registration online or on paper, then you are not officially registered to lobby for them. Okay? This is what we call an evergreen problem. It's like you have evergreen projects. This is every year we have principals that just don't verify. Largely, I think a lot of times it's because we're emailing the CEO of one of the biggest corporations in Alabama, and that person doesn't really check their email themselves all the time. And our email comes from something called receipts@nicusa.com. And if you didn't buy anything from NICUSA, you might not check that email. We try to give, I will send out an email from my email address saying, hey, this is not spam, go check it please and verify the registration. But this is always a problem. We will email you all and ask for your help in contacting your principal. And then at some point we may have to just delete them. And then you will not be registered. So, because your registration needs to be on our website, and we're working to make sure that, once a registration is completed, that can be live while the others are awaiting completion. So, but we're working on that development online. And you also have the ability to resend the email because, we're working on trying to reduce the number of times that somebody has to touch the data. And so when you put the email address in, if the email address is wrong, then that email address is going nowhere, right? And so then the principal will say, well, I don't know. And then you're like, oh gosh, it's an L before, Doe. And so we just try to work with you to make sure that we have all the information correct. The primary thing that we want is compliance. If you forget to file your quarterly report and you're a week late, just file it. Okay, compliance is the most important thing for us. And if you feel like you have screwed something up, don't not tell me. Okay, I'm not going to yell at you. I'm going to really try to help you and get you where you need to be and make sure that your records are up to date and that you're good to go. If you have a change in your contact information, your email has changed, your address has changed, your principal has changed, which happens all the time, just email the lobbyist principal at ethics.alabama.gov. That is a shared, there are multiple people that can check that email. Okay, we did that on purpose because Vicki had been here forever. Vicki Manning, we miss you if you're watching. I hope you're not and doing something more fun. Vicki Manning was here forever, and so that was the contact. And when she left, we realized, oh my goodness, we need to have something where somebody else can access and help everybody that needs to be helped. So you won't have a gap in service, hopefully, even if somebody's out of the office. So that's where you email, lobbyistprincipal@ethics.alabama.gov. You can email me personally, but if I happen to be out of the office for a couple of days, it may not get answered as quickly. So I think that's it. Does anybody have any questions about the process for? Oh, you will get reminder emails hopefully at the end of each quarter, and I'm going to try to make it so that I only have to send those emails to people who have not filed their quarterly reports. But I'm not sure I have that capability. So when I send out the email, I now have a disclaimer that says, if you have filed your third quarter report, you may disregard this email. But I still had people call me and say, I did file my third quarter report, can you check? And so I get that, and I appreciate everybody's being anxious to comply. You can also check whether or not you filed something. That on our website, we have a public record search, and you can search online without your credentials. So you wouldn't have to have that, because all of the statements, the quarterly reports you file, your lobbying registration, the principal verification, all of that is available online to the general public. So even without, because I had somebody email me and said, I don't have my credentials, I can't check. You just go to the public records, look for your name, and you'll see whether or not you'd filed your report. And that's immediate. So as soon as you file it, it's available. And I will try to send out, be sure that we send out at the end of every quarter a reminder to file your quarterly reports. And if you have any problems, just let me know. Okay, do we have any questions on the phone that came up?
Get my glasses, hang on. Is it okay to invite 4 legislators to dinner, in which each person's meal is less than $25? So the total expense for the meal for them is $100. You said, hang on, I'll let you read it, because it goes on and I don't have your password.
Okay. And I'm probably, because we can't give all of the advice that we give while it is free, and we have to give it in writing because we have an administrative rule that says we have to. So we'll see if I can answer this hypothetical. Is it okay to invite 4 legislators to dinner in which each person's meal is less than $25? So the total expense for the meal for them is $100. You said we can't stack, and I wasn't clear. I see. Yes, I will answer that hypothetical. What you're trying to avoid is giving a thing of value to a principal, a public official, a lobbyist, or subordinate of a lobbyist, all right? As one of the exceptions to the definition of a thing of value is something of de minimis value, which is under $25. So if it's $25 or less, I can safely say that unless you're spending that money to corruptly influence their official action, then yes, that would be permissible. You can take multiple people out at a time, as long as you only spend the designated amount on each person, all right? And there's also a specific meal exception. If you're a lobbyist, you can spend $25 on a public official or a public employee. If you are a principal, you can spend $50 on that individual. You can take 4 of them out at the time and spend $25, $25, $25, $25. Does that answer your question? If you're still there. Okay, I'm not getting a response, but I hope that answers your question. I think that it does. Okay, does anybody else have any questions? Okay, great. Well, I'm happy to be here and happy to serve you. Let me know if you need anything, and we'll help however we can. And here's Tom. Do you need this back?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I can take this off.
I'm not going to take that off.
Yes.
No.
Okay, good. I did answer his question, her question.
Okay, good. The other thing that I wanted to point out, in addition to what Cynthia said with that, is we get asked from time to time, how do you figure that $25 if you're taking somebody out? Does it include tax and gratuity? And we have informally interpreted that section as not applying to tax or gratuity. It's just the amount of what is being consumed by the public official. Okay, so I think that makes it a little bit easier for you too. Cynthia has gone over a lot of this, but I'm just going to repeat it one more time. Remember to update your registration. That is important for you, because if you are out there lobbying somebody and somebody else checks your registration and doesn't see that you have listed them as a principal for you, then it might generate some calls or some questions about why you're lobbying. So make sure you do that as soon as you can. Communicate with your principal. As Cynthia said, they've got to confirm that you are lobbying for them so that you show up as a lobbyist on our website. Again, every session we have somebody who will say, so-and-so's over here lobbying and they haven't registered. I have not seen a situation where the person who is lobbying hasn't registered with us. Generally, we're waiting on the principal to confirm it. And one of the values of having somebody in this position, as long as the predecessor, Vicki Manning, was here, she knew perennially who was going to be late confirming. And so with confidence, she could say, they're fine, they're fine, they're fine, back off. Because this principal always does it 3 weeks late, or they always do it after my second phone call. So it would just make things a lot easier if you communicate with them and make sure they understand they've got to confirm you as their lobbyist. Remember to actually review your quarterly filings. I understand that in the business world, you will submit things to people and have them submit it on your behalf. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. However, if your name is on it, you need to make sure that it accurately reflects the information that needs to be reported. And the subordinate you have given this to may not realize that the room that you comped for this person was in excess of $250, and for that reason would have to be disclosed on your quarterly filing. We have had that happen before, where somebody said, I didn't review it, I'm sorry, yes, that should have been disclosed, and this was after somebody else had made a big deal about it and written about it online on AL.com, actually, about expenses that hadn't been reported. And all of that was avoidable by simply looking at the quarterly filings yourself to make sure that it accurately reflects and discloses what you're supposed to disclose. Remember the 10-day rule for pre-certifications, and remember to ask questions. Whatever questions you've got, direct them to us, because at the end of the day, for the lobbyists who deal with our office, that is the primary thing we can do for you, is to make your job easier by answering these questions for you. There's just no reason to be fumbling around trying to figure out what the answer is, because we're more than happy to give it to you. So that's all I've got. Does anybody here today or attending my webinar have any questions for us?
I do have one question. If the principal hasn't verified us, but we're attending the training, are we okay? Up until that point, or do we have to do the training again?
No, you're
You
good.
don't have to do the training again. I thought you had already registered. No, you don't have to do the training again.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
That would kind of stink, wouldn't it, if you had to come back? Did you come from Louisiana just for this?
No,
Or you had to? Oh, okay. Got it. Okay. All right. Well, good. Well, that's a fairly short drive for you then. Good. No, and remember, lobbyists only have to do this one time unless there's a substantial change to the law. And we have not required retraining of lobbyists since I've been here. There have been a couple of times when changes were made to the act, and we've just sent out like a blast email to the lobbying community, reminding them of some minor changes to the Code of Alabama, but that's the most that we've done with that.
I'm just going to step in. If we do have some significant changes to the online registration process, that should make it easier, not harder. But if we do have that, just look for an email from me saying I'm probably going to do some sort of Zoom call or something and break it up, depending on how many people are interested in how the registration process has changed. It's not a change to the law, and it's not required. It would just be something to try to help y'all and walk you through it and answer questions.
Right, and I can't remember if Cynthia said this, but Cynthia spent an extraordinary amount of time trying to streamline the process for lobbyists, and so we are hoping by next year that that process is going to be much easier for all lobbyists in Alabama in terms of updating your materials, filing the things that you've got to file. That's part of a larger process within the commission that we've really tried to take advantage of technology in a way that keeps you from having to duplicate certain information that doesn't change over time. And so just know that we're working on that. And we value your input, because a lot of the changes we have made to the database have come about when lobbyists have said, hey, it would be so much easier for us if we could just do this, that, or the other. And because we aren't having to file the quarterly reports ourselves or worry about things such as whether the principal has confirmed that we are actually representing them, it's just not something that may pop into our mind very easily. So give us plenty of feedback about how we can make the system more user-friendly for y'all, because again, as Cynthia said, and as I will reiterate, the point of this for us is for you to comply. So any way that we can make it easier for you to comply, that's what we want to do.
And I'm going to give you all a pro tip. When you log in, to file your fourth quarter report, which all of you are going to do if you're registered, there is a drop down for the year. Right under, before your credentials, it says 2022. Change that year to 2021 and then log in, and then you'll be able to file your fourth quarter report for 2020, or sorry, not 2020, I'm sorry, 2023. So you'll be in 2023. The drop down will say 2023, but you need to change it to 2022 in order to access the fourth quarter report for 2022. Because I promise, people get so frustrated with themselves, they'll email me back directly and say, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I didn't see it. Because the only way to answer the question is because they're saying, the quarter report is not available. And I email them back and I say, oh, just choose the drop down. They're like, I'm so sorry, this is not usually who I am. And I was like, it's totally fine. But so y'all have a pro tip, just choose the correct year and your fourth quarter report will be there.
Right, and it's that kind of extra step that we are trying, not that one specifically, but it's things like that we're trying to catch in this process. As you might expect, because we had an employee who had done it for so long, she was handling it fine. She had her own system, she had her own way of doing it, and she was great at it then. But then once we get into it, we start realizing that there's ways that we can improve it and bring it up to date. And so we're really in that process. So as you work with it, and I'm speaking to those who were attended by webinar too, give us feedback because we really, really value that. So before I get out of here, any more questions from anybody? Okay. Well, remember, we're here to help you, so be sure to ask questions, and I hope that, did you have?
Get your certification if you did the training online. Be sure to get your certification and send it in. So I get that confirmation email so I can check off that you did. And anybody in the room, please be sure to sign in so I can check off that you've attended so you don't have to do it again. Not that it hasn't been lovely.
And if y'all don't have any questions, either through webinar or here in person, then I hope you all have a great day and a great rest of the week.